It started as a dream come true. I had spent months searching for an apartment I could afford, and when I found it, this little, slightly run-down place on the outskirts of the city, it felt like fate. The rent was unbelievably low, and the location, while isolated, had a certain charm. The apartment was small, old, but cozy. I was excited to finally live on my own, away from the noise of family and the distractions of the city. I moved in on a Saturday, eager to begin my new chapter. The building was old, sure, with peeling paint and the faint smell of mildew in the air. But that didn't bother me. It felt like home. For the first few days, everything was fine. I unpacked my things, set up my furniture, and spent my evenings basking in the quiet solitude. I even got used to the creaky floors and the musty smell. It was normal, right? Just an old building, nothing more. But then things started to change. The silence of the place began to feel strange. During the day, everything was calm, but at night, an unsettling quiet settled over the apartment. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something is just waiting. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Who wouldn't feel a little uneasy in a place that was so isolated, so far from everything? But it didn't stop. Every night, I'd hear faint, almost imperceptible sounds. Footsteps. They were soft at first, almost like they were coming from above. But there was no one living above me. The building only had 3 floors. Still, I dismissed it. Maybe it was the building settling. Then the knocking started. It began one night just as I was about to fall asleep. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, sitting up in bed. I thought it was the pipes, or maybe just a neighbor at the door. But there was something wrong about it. It wasn't a regular knock. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was taunting me. The knocking came from the door. Knock, knock, knock. It repeated as if it were waiting for a response. I held my breath, too terrified to move. I waited for the sound to stop, but it didn't. I crept out of bed and tiptoed to the door, listening. But the hallway outside was empty. There was nothing there. No one. I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. The next night, the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't stand it anymore. I opened the door and looked down the hallway. Nothing. Just the dim lights flickering in the distance. The building was old, but that didn't explain the knocking, or the feeling of someone, or something, watching me. Then the whispers started. I could hear them faintly at first, like a distant conversation coming from the walls. Low, murmuring voices, too soft to make out. It felt like they were all around me, closing in, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They would grow louder at night, but the moment I tried to focus, they would disappear. It was as if they were mocking me, just out of reach. One night, in a fit of frustration, I decided to check the apartment next door. I had never seen anyone come or go from there, and the door was always closed. I figured it might be empty, just like the rest of the building. But when I opened it, I realized I was wrong. The apartment was not empty. Inside, the air was cold and thick with a stale, decaying smell. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched into the plaster as if someone had carved them with a knife. They were jagged and messy, like some kind of ritualistic writing. The room was dark, and I could barely make out the shapes of old furniture covered in dust. I didn't know why I went in, but I had to know what was behind those strange markings. Then the door slammed shut behind me. I turned around, my heart pounding. The apartment was now completely dark, the only light coming from a flickering lamp in the corner. I felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure in the air, as if the very walls were closing in on me. And then I heard it, a voice, deep and raspy, coming from the corner of the room. "You shouldn't be here." I couldn't breathe. The voice was cold, empty, and it felt like it was coming from somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the apartment. The voice echoed in my head, sending chills down my spine. I stumbled back toward the door, but it wouldn't open. I tried the handle again and again, but it was locked. Panic set in. The walls seemed to close in on me. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, the sound of dozens of voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My head was spinning. I couldn't escape. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the room fell silent. The door clicked open, as if someone had released the lock. I stumbled out of the apartment, gasping for air. I had to get out. I ran back to my apartment, locking the door behind me, but it didn't stop. The knocking started again, knock, 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 and this time it was not just on the door. It was coming from all sides, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It surrounded me. The whispers joined in again, clearer now, louder. They were in the air, in my head. I couldn't escape. The apartment had become a prison. The next day, I went to the landlord. I had to know if anyone else had experienced what I had. Her face went pale when I mentioned the apartment next door. "That apartment," she said, voice trembling. "No one stays there for long. The last tenant disappeared without a trace. No one knows what happened to him, but every person who's lived there says the same thing. Strange noises, whispers, the feeling of being watched. Some people think the building is cursed. I didn't want to tell you, but it's been like this for years." I asked her why no one had told me about it before, and she just shook her head. "People think it's best to keep quiet. If you're here for long enough, you'll understand. The apartment, it's hungry." I left the building that day. I couldn't stay any longer. I moved out that night, leaving everything behind. The apartment still haunts me, even now. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the knocking, the whispers, the voice telling me I shouldn't have been there. But I'll never forget the warning the landlord gave me before I left. The apartment doesn't let go. It wants you to stay. I'm not sure what haunted that place, but I know one thing. It's still waiting for someone else to move in.